I would recommend going through either a pre-screener, and the pre-screening process is whereby you are talking to an eligibility expert, either from a local nonprofit. We do that at the Coalition Against Hunger as well. The Food Bank for New York City does this, and they'll sit you down, they'll ask you some questions, and they'll produce and sometimes plug that into a computer, produce an information sheet that tells you whether or not you're eligible. And if you are, when you go to the food stamps office, you're then empowered to know exactly what you're eligible for. We also run a partnership called the FCAP project with the paperless office system of the Human Resources Administration, whereby we're able to allow individuals to apply entirely at a nonprofit organization, so they don't have to step foot into the government office. And those are the two kind of specialized ways I would recommend to apply. You can also just call 311 and go straight to the office. I had a little bit of help since I was working in the business at the time.
Let's take a phone call. Ty in Williamsburg. You're on WNYC. Hello, Ty.
Hey, how's it going?
All right. So, your experience?
Well, I applied for food stamps. So first we all did it together, and we've had a bit of frustration with the actual food stamp offices, and I'm wondering if there's like anything else that people can do apart from having to deal with the offices themselves, because they seem to be really counterintuitive and really difficult to wield. We were trying to figure out if it's because it would just make it more difficult for people to get them, so the only sorts of people who would want to get food stamps are the ones who are willing to put up with like an 8-hour wait, for instance.
Michael?
Yeah, I think that's entirely true. I mean, my experience being a 23-year-old single college-educated person who was just trained, I think about 2 months prior, on the eligibility requirements and how to apply for food stamps, my application was messed up. My application was not accepted because I didn't have a clear documentation of my rent status from my landlord, and I faxed it in and it got lost. These things are not uncommon. So, a lot of the work that we do is to make this process easier. We think it's a shame that this is the reality, but things like our paperless office system, where you can go to a community-based organization and sit with people who care and who are working on your behalf and advocating for you, that's one way to buffer that process.
Ty, did you get fingerprinted when you got approved for food stamps?
Yeah, they fingerprint everybody right at the end.
And is that an anti-fraud measure, Joel Berg?
It is supposedly an anti-fraud measure, but 46 states in the union don't do it. And those 46 states have lower error rates than New York State. The state, a few years ago, removed it for the rest of the state. So big cities like Erie County, Buffalo, no longer do it. But here, because of Mayor Bloomberg's insistence, they still do it. The city told us a few years ago they caught potentially a few dozen people out of a caseload of 1.1 or 1.2 million at the time. I pointed out, even if all those people were fraudulent and crooked, and I don't think that's the case, but if they were, that would still be a lower fraud rate than the United States Senate, the United States House of Representatives, and clearly the New York State Legislature. So this really is a double standard, treating poor people like criminals just to get the benefits their tax dollars have already paid for.
Come on, you can't measure people against the standard of the New York State Legislature. That's just unfair.
Well, that is a low blow. Now, I want to say there are plenty of incredible, wonderfully honest and hardworking people in the state legislature, including people like State Senator Liz Kruger, who's a real champion of anti-hunger work. That being said, it is a little ironic that certain conservative policymakers insist that somehow poor people on food stamps are somehow uniquely crooked, when in fact the fact shows they're far less crooked than much of Wall Street and many of our elected officials, and yet it's not too hard for them to get their aid.
Very diplomatic. Joel Berg and Michael Paone are my guests from the New York City Coalition Against Hunger, with everything you always wanted to know about food stamps, but were too embarrassed to ask. You can call us now. Use any name you want. 212-433-WNYC, 433-9692, or you can post, and of course nobody knows if you're a dog, on the internet at WNYC.org. Click on Brian Lehrer Show. And somebody who claims to be named Kate has just posted this. I am wondering, do stores have to accept food stamps? Joel, do you know?
I do know they do not. In fact, it's entirely voluntary. Now, the vast majority of stores that sell a wide variety of foods are eligible to accept food stamps, and the vast majority do. We're pleased that big Sam's Clubs and BJ's have started accepting food stamps, but the Costco chain is one noted exception. And it seems really crazy, beyond the morality of turning away low-income customers. Food stamps pay out more than $1 billion a year in New York City in federal benefits, so it just seems crazy that Costco would turn away that money. But the vast majority of stores do voluntarily accept food stamps, and more farmers markets are voluntarily accepting food stamps.
And it also goes to the original post on your Uncommon Economic Indicators, the sign in this Asian deli, as it was described, at East Tyrant Avenue and Teaneck Road in Teaneck, where the sign went up that said, "We are temporarily waiting for our license from the state to accept food stamps." So is it hard, Michael, are you familiar enough with this area? Is it hard for a little local store to set up to start accepting food stamps?
I'm not exactly sure about the application process, but I would add that this has to be thought about in the context of community development. If you're in a low-income community and you have a whole subset of a population who can't afford to buy food, what is your alternative? I mean, you can rely on emergency food. There's 1,200 soup kitchens and food pantries all throughout New York City. But when people are going to this, they're not contributing to the economy. They're getting a commodity assistance rather than a cash assistance, which allows them to partake in the food market. So this is a stimulus. I think for a going figure is that for every $5 spent from the federal government in food stamps, $9.20 is generated. So this is actually a stimulus measure, and it behooves communities to think about ways that they can be sharing this economic activity.